Well, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the planet. Welcome to this webinar discussing 2025 predictions, continuity, and surprises, or surprises and continuity, however we want to order it. I'm very excited to be speaking today with several members of the Cyber Threat Alliance, including Samir Mody from K7, Adam Bennett from Red Piranha, and Takahiro Kakamaru from NEC. So we're very glad to have all of you here. I'll let each of you just give a quick introduction about, who you are and where you are in the company, and then we'll jump right in. So Samir, I'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Samir Mody. I'm the VP of Threat Research at K7. So that basically means I run the lab, K7 Labs. Been here for a pretty long time. Before that, I was at Sophos for almost 10 years. So I've been in the cybersecurity industry for quite a long time.
Great. Thanks, Samir. Adam?
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here. Adam Bennett, CEO, founder of Red Piranha. Founded the company back in 2020, 2015, with frustrations in the market. And we have a dedicated SOC and threat intelligence team. And it's great to be part of this discussions today.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Takahiro.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Takahiro Kakamaru. I'm working for NEC Corporation. So now I'm leading threat intelligence group here in NEC. So I have been working mostly for research and development area more than 20 years. So now I'm working as a director for cyber intelligence group. Nice to meet you.
Very good. Well, I think the first question that I'll start with is, well, a good friend of mine, Professor Herb Lin out at Stanford, one time said that it's very easy to be a cybersecurity expert. Just declare that today will be worse than yesterday and tomorrow will be worse than today, and you will probably be right. So it's a very common statement in cybersecurity that things are always getting worse. Is that actually going to be true for 2025? And by the way, what do we mean by worse? So Samir, maybe I'll just start with you.
So I think that question is an interesting one for a layperson. To be honest, what is meant by worse first? I suppose if we were to assume that worse meant that the volume of malware was increasing, then that's probably been the case since the 1980s, because the volume of malware has been increasing. But if I think about the threat stuff, from a lab's perspective or the technical perspective, the threat level, then I can't really imagine that anything is worse now than it has been for the last 2 or 3 years, probably. So there's nothing in there which screams at me that it is actually worse now than it has been before. It's just the volume of malware that's just going to keep increasing. And I know there are other things I'm going to be discussing where we will touch upon that, but that's my take on this.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, right? That maybe in some ways that it may be better or worse, like for individual industries or individual companies, but sort of for the ecosystem as a whole, that in many ways it's kind of hit kind of a level that it's not really changing very much. Adam, what's your perspective on this?
Thanks, Samir, for that. Look, it does get worse all the time. I don't know if it's worse. I actually describe it to my team as a new beginning each day, right? So what that means is that as we increase that attack surface, things get more complicated and the complexity of attacks changes, right? So yeah, more potential impact, higher frequency, and just generally the uptake of new technologies introduces new threats and risks all the time. So that's where that comment about things getting worse kind of gets dragged into that conversation all the time. Not so much it's worse, it's just a new day every day for us. And that's constantly been evolving for as long as I've been involved in the industry, right? So.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly a very, as we continue to bring new digital technologies online, the bad guys continue to find new ways to exploit that technology. So, there's that dynamism in the environment. So, Takahiro, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, thank you. So I don't think the situation is as bad as it seems. So of course, as Samir said, I think that what is getting worse is the number of cyber attacks and sophistication of attacks and diversification of attack method and increase in threat to personal information or critical infrastructure. So on the other hand, I think the fact that some ransomware groups are being disrupted and reorganized, and that the methods of attacks are changing, shows that the attackers are also continue to struggle and devise new methods. So in addition, the use of AI in various security solutions is progressing, and the security culture is taking root, and the security awareness of organization is also increasing. So yeah, that's my perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's a very valuable way of looking at it. I think one of the interesting things about this space, though, is that for all of the changes, right, that have undoubtedly occurred, it's really kind of eerie to go back and read policy documents or threat reports or other things from Samir. I'll take you back even to the 1980s, right? And you read some of them, and if you just change a few words to modernize some of the language, like it might as well have been written like last week. And so that's a little bit, it's a little bit disturbing. But then, what it also says is that some of the underlying fundamental issues really remain the same. And so maybe Adam, I'll go to you first this time. But what do you think some of the cybersecurity issues that will in fact remain the same in 2025?
You're exactly right, right? These things are just recurring like a process. We see vulnerability management going to maintain, that those weaknesses in the systems, and phishing going to be the top two. So that leads to introduction of new systems, like we'll talk about AI later on. But, as we bring these new systems into play, are we bringing in those fundamentals with that? And we don't. And that we've been doing that same mistake. It's a catch-up game, right? It's all about operations first, and then cybersecurity follows. And that's the problem, really, from where I see it. From you talk about the 80s, well, it's been that recurring theme constantly. If we can learn to bake in security at the early stages, which is what we've been trying to push as a common concept for the last decade, that might go towards solving that. And we have seen some of the needle be moved a little bit on that, but we generally see startups and new people entering, the space, and of course they're not adopting that fully, and of course this drives the risk, right, and those vulnerabilities. So realistically, we're seeing the same type of attacks, just new ways of deploying them and executing them on new technologies all the time, right? So it's just a constant. That's where we get the whack-a-mole concept from. So that, for me, they're the things that'll stay the same. The other big thing that's really stood out for me, I suppose, over the last 18 months, 2 years, is the enormous amount of data exfiltration, right? It's shockingly horrible. How are threat actors getting away with 200 terabytes of data out of a network and not being, detected? And this goes to some major gaps, I think, in security programs and detection programs out there. There's not enough good NDR, in place. We're relying too much on EDR. And of course, once EDR is bypassed, or if it's living off the land, the detection capabilities just aren't there. I mean, if we can't detect 200 terabytes going out of a network, your detection engineering programs sucks. Sorry, but that's to put it bluntly. So I think there's some real good gaps the industry can look at closing there as well, which will reduce loss and risk. Particularly in this day and age where we're looking to make privacy a more fundamental sort of pillar of cybersecurity.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of those, I mean, you touched on a lot of different themes, right? The sort of the issues around vulnerability management, patch management, right? That's been a hardy perennial issue. It'll continue to be an issue in 2025. There will be issues around, new technologies and new market entrants and secure by design, secure by default. All of those things will continue to be high priority issues, I think, going into 2025. Um, Takahiro, from your perspective, what are some of the cybersecurity issues that will remain the same in 2025?
Yeah, I want to raise three things. First one is threat of ransomware. So it is said that the number of incidents could be a little bit decreased. However, amount of incident could be a little bit higher. So, however, we will see some method changes in the for 2025. So it seems that they are continually changing the method, how they can convince the victim. For example, sometimes they want to have make a call to some management people, not IT people, to it means they have some budget to solve some issue. So it seems that they always think how they can get the money from the victims. So that's the first thing. So second thing is stealing the legitimate ID and password. So I think I believe that the reason for this is that initial access brokers activities. So, for example, it's because of browser's profile synchronization function. It has led to the mixture of private use and non-private or organizational use. So it could make some significant incident because of legitimate ID and password. So last one is disinformation and information manipulation. So security measures in cognitive domain will become more necessary in 2025. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think definitely ransomware is not going any place. It's a useful tool, as are some of the other things that you've been talking about. In fact, I would argue that many of the things and themes that we see in phishing emails were probably used in con games in the Middle Ages or whatever. I mean, some of these things are, they're truly ancient and they really are more about human nature and psychology than anything else. Samir, from your perspective, what are you thinking will be some of the issues that have been going on that'll continue into 2025?
So I would agree with Takahiro. For me, it's got to be still ransomware. There are a few reasons for this. I mean, I think since 2013, ransomware for me has been one of the biggest challenges. And as you said, Michael, it's not going anywhere because why would you fix something that ain't broke, right? So
Yeah.
even if volumes are potentially coming down, there are more groups out there. They're kind of doing the same thing. I think what has changed over the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years is that instead of trying to use phishing to get in there, it's more about exploitation of vulnerabilities, trying to get software threat actors who are actually within the network. That really is a challenge. I would definitely say that. But if I go back to the previous question we asked about how where things are getting worse, I think in certain respects things are actually getting better because if you look at the availability of vulnerabilities, right? I mean, that's exploits for certain vulnerabilities, especially remote code execution vulnerabilities. Those are actually quite difficult to get your hands on now. And if you can get them, they're pretty expensive. So the reason why they're expensive, it's just supply and demand, right? So there's a lot of demand, but there's not much supply because the ecosystem is actually a little bit more resilient to that. I would have to So I'm going to give some kudos to to Microsoft as well for that, because the underlying operating system architecture, especially related to kernel drivers and so on, it has actually become significantly more robust. So, but yeah, coming back to the second question you asked, I think it's still ransomware. Adam mentioned about the kind of stealers that can take terabytes of data. That's going to keep happening, but for me, that's something which obviously affects a lot of enterprises. If we're talking about both enterprises and consumers, in our experience, it's very much still ransomware that is the concern.
Yeah, no, I think as you said, Samir, like you can even call it the rational bad guy theory, right? Which is, they're economically rational actors. They're making plenty of money. Why on earth would you, mess with that model, right? Like, just doesn't make any sense. So I think, fully expecting them to continue doing what they're doing, I think that makes imminent sense. I think maybe I'll, sort of going to this next, kind of question. Was there a trend or an event that really surprised you over the last 6 months? And maybe I'll combine it with the next question, which was, on the other hand, was there a trend or an event that seemed to surprise a lot of people, but you were kind of like, duh, sort of that was obvious to anybody who should have been looking. So maybe both, something that surprised you, but also something that seemed to surprise other people, but you thought was an sort of obvious outcome. And maybe Takahiro, I'll start with you this time.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I want to pick up one trend from recently, so which was attackers launch phishing attack with teams after mail bomb attacks. So massive email bombing attack of thousands of email against the target, followed by a phishing attack posing as a technical support in Teams call or some voice call. So it's sort of support fraud, but in a way that it's so natural that it does not seem unnatural and it's not noticed by victims. So making full use of Microsoft Suite of Office 365, contact in Teams, screen sharing capability, and deploying malware in SharePoint. So it's necessary to manage attacks that can be completed within a series of tools. So internal fraud and what is happening internally. So we should focus on more internal way, not only the between internal or outside. So another incident which was one of the most big incident in Japan last year. In Japan, there has been several incidents that result in losses of several $1 million. So I don't think it was obvious to me, but I think it was an incident that shows the importance of recovery and resilience. So one of the cases that suffered major damage was that of a major publishing company in Japan, which took several months to fully restore their services. So it has been said for several years that more attention should be paid to resilience aspects such as response and recovery. And this incident has once again highlighted the importance of this. So because of that, I picked two incidents. It's related to Japan. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I think this is one of the things that I also wanted to draw out of the conversation, which is that the environment here in the United States, where I'm located, there are similarities, but it's different in Japan. There's differences in India. There's differences in Australia. In case anybody hadn't picked up on Adam's accent yet, from at least from my perspective, the but there's also a lot of interesting continuity, and I think it's partially because of the global nature of technology, right? That many of us are using the same software, using the same hardware, essentially, no matter where we are on the planet. And so that while there are cultural differences, there are differences in there. There's also a lot of continuity. Samir, from your perspective, was there something that surprised you over the last 6 months, and then was there something that you were like, really, why were you surprised by this?
I'm actually going to talk about something which is probably a little bit longer than 6 months ago, but also something which wasn't a cybersecurity event. I mean, if you think about the biggest event of last year, it would be that meltdown, which was due to a cybersecurity product. At the time it happened, I got almost panic-stricken emails coming, or communications of my cousin saying, "Is there some massive malware out there? Should I be worried about something?" And it was actually the first time I actually even heard about it. So I just quickly checked what's going on, and I realized pretty quickly that, look, this isn't probably a cybersecurity event. So what surprised me about that was that just the ubiquity of the product. And that's probably because it was installed on Azure servers. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that the most surprising thing about last year or last 6 to 8 months is that it wasn't actually malware. It was malware related in terms of it being a cybersecurity product, but it wasn't not actually a cybersecurity event. So, and don't get me wrong, if you work in cybersecurity, you realize that every single cybersecurity product there has had a BSOD. There's no two words about that. We need to burrow deep into the operating system, and there are occasional mistakes that are going to be made over there. So I remember telling my entire team, in our research lab that, listen. So, you guys need to, it's actually quite easy to make mistakes like that. We've all done it. And we should never think that we're never going to make that kind of mistake. But yeah, the point that if you go back 2 or 3 years before that, there's been one major cybersecurity event, that at least one which has come up during that time, which is malware related. But last year, the one thing that comes to my mind is not a malware event. So that's the point I'd like to make.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. It actually reinforces, when I was the cybersecurity coordinator in the U.S. government, I used to have a saying that, cyber rule number 1 was never attribute exclusively to evil when stupid was still available as an option. So, that was don't leap to conclusions because, it could well just be stupid. Right. And I think that CrowdStrike incident was, very, emblematic of that rule. Right. And I think you also bring up a good point too. And this is something that we talk about, I think, when we talk about, vulnerabilities, right, which is that every software product has them. And, casting stones at somebody else for their vulnerabilities is really not a wise policy, because tomorrow it'll be your turn. So no, that's a really good example, Samir. Adam, what did from your perspective, something surprising, something that you also thought maybe not surprising, but seemed to surprise a lot of other people?
Yeah, I touched on it earlier, the double extortion, the exfiltration factor not being really, jumped on quick enough, I suppose, is the way to look at it. If we look back over the last 18 months, the number of large breaches that have made the media, all had that large extortion factor. What we've been tracking over the last couple of years in Australia, there's a couple of major breaches, one against the major health services provider, insurance, and another one against a major telco, saw pretty much the details of 60% of Australians get hacked. So one of the things we've been tracking from there is the follow-on. And we talked about ransomware. Samir talked about ransomware still being a consumer focus. Well, the amount of attacks that then happened as a secondary and third string to that initial data being sort of published and released is incredible. And I think this is, from a threat intelligence perspective, this is what we do, right? So, as a group as well, we're tracking these things, and you're able to see, Australia being a little bit more of a smaller island, we're able to see the correlations there of secondary and third string attacks coming off the initial breach. And that dollar loss, or, that isn't really quantified well, and understood. And I think that's something as an industry we can learn from that, and then potentially learn to protect ourselves a little bit better from that as well, and protect consumers a little bit better. It's something that's only come out in the last, for us anyway, in the last few years.
Yeah, no, I think from, I'll sort of build on that and say, I think the thing that has actually has caught me even a little bit off guard has been the estimate of the losses due to cybercrime, right? Have started to hit numbers that are big even by my scale of having worked in the US government, right? Like, and that takes some work. Like, it's not easy to get to those levels of numbers. And but I think it really just shows how big of a problem, like particularly cybercrime, has become. And I just don't think that's sustainable over the long term, right? Like, economies and societies just won't put up with that level of loss. So I do think it's actually going to probably prompt some action. Samir, I'll turn to you with this one again. Sort of, are you giving, K7, you giving customers and clients, any different cybersecurity advice for 2025 other than what we've been saying for the last, 20 years or whatever, that you've been in the business? Have you had to update your talking points at all? So
Not well, actually, to be honest, I would say the thing that we still our space a lot, enterprise customer. So our have actually can you hello
Samir,
Michael, can you hear me?
Yeah, you've been breaking up a little bit, so that was a little bit of a challenge in there.
Oh, sorry about that. It just came up at the wrong time. If you can hear me now, I'll just repeat that, ransomware is still the biggest issue that even our enterprise customers face. Over the last couple of years, it has actually, the number of incidents reported to us has actually decreased. And maybe because we're kind of harping on about the same thing, but there's something else that we added, which is pretty useful. We call it breach intelligence protection, where we use our telemetry to look at non-ransomware related events. We know how threat actors work, different ransomware groups, for example, Malox. They will use, let's say, a crypto miner before doing something else. So, we've been sort of, using our telemetry to say, okay, are we having any telltale signs before something goes boom? Because once it goes boom, we all know ransomware that you're not really going to get your stuff back. So you need to go back to backups and so on and so forth. So we would consider it a bit of a win that by trying to coax our customers, we send them proactive emails based on the telemetry saying there are X, Y, Z sort of thing on your network. You need to do something about it. Some customers don't actually pay heed to that. I mean, that's obviously quite irritating, but we can only do what we can do. But that does actually help. And along with giving them that intelligence, about something on the network, we do give them the cyber hygiene tips. For example, if you take Maddox, we'll say, look, one common mechanism of entry is to exploit MySQL, right? So the database is, if it's externally facing, can be a vector inside, and you need to do something about that. So cyber hygiene, I can't overstate that. I think that's key.
That's great. Thanks, Samir. Adam, what about you? What you're given any different advice this year? Is the same advice?
We've seen same advice, I suppose, a little bit more listening to that, some of the advice, some of that being around that zero trust or least privilege, at least, particularly in the those cloud and hybrid environment. We've seen a lot of API APIs being attacked over the last few years, and of course that exfiltration of data being accessed that way, and like Samir was just saying. So a real focus around helping customers sort of get some good segmentation, and it's a good protection on those environments. So when mistakes are made, that data is protected. At the end of the day, the data is what we're trying to protect, right? So, the ransomware is like a symptom of that in essence. Having good backups doesn't really help the end customers if that data has been exfiltrated. So, and the end users that data belongs to. So it's enhanced incident response is another thing that's starting to take heed. It's not just about having retainers. It's about having people, process, and technology ready and ready to go. So these things can be done efficiently and quick, and making sure that we're, responding to the 50-50 line ball calls that often have been passed through to the keeper, the catcher in America. So, the problem with passing those through the keeper is those 1 out of 100 events that turns out to be the $100 million breach that shuts your company down, right? Or does the real damage. So we need to be dealing with those 100 to catch that 1 out of 100. If you go over history too, we've seen so many times there's been events or alarms that haven't been dealt with. And that's because, in my opinion, our incident response processes have been too onerous. So if you're going to onerous, you've got a retainer with a cyber company, for example, but you've got a big engagement process that has to happen after, you're going to let that 50-50 line ball call go through the keeper. So it's about bringing these efficiencies to the boil and enhancing that. And that's been another thing. We're having a lot of good conversations with customers around that concept generally. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I think that's also the thing too, right? Is that there's an awful lot of, cyber events that are non-events, right? That and that's actually part of the challenge, right? There's an awful lot of noise in the system, and sort of, extracting that signal from the noise, and sort of being able to see that ahead of time is incredibly difficult. It's always very obvious in hindsight, but knowing that ahead of time is incredibly difficult. Takahiro, from your perspective, are you given any different advice? Same advice?
Yeah, rather same, I think. So there are also various new threats emerging, as we have been discussing. But when we respond to incidents, so we often get the impression that the cause is that the basic part are not in place. For example, misconfiguration of cloud infrastructure or vulnerability management patches has been not attached properly. Even customer didn't know the patch has been released already. So there are some gap between the customer and vulnerability information. And also we push knowing phishing tactics, which kind of phishing mail is used, so etc. So in that sense, we are working hard to promote secure by design, educate people about the importance of patching and security updates and other activity to increase security awareness. So rather than being special, nothing special, but focus is on sticking on the basics while keeping an eye on new threats. So we shouldn't forget the basic is still important, Yeah, I think that's my feeling so far.
Yeah, no, I think we've heard a lot of really good themes in this section, and it really shows the continuity of the issues that we're dealing with, but also that in many ways we as an industry we know what we need to do. It's really about getting the people to actually do it, right? That's the big challenge. So I think it's actually very impressive that we've managed to do, this webinar, get more than 30 minutes into it. We've only had one, passing reference to AI. So that's an accomplishment. I feel like I've met one of my performance goals. But I do think we have to talk about both AI and some of the other technologies that may be emerging. And I think, certainly, CTA has written an entire joint analytic report on adversary use of AI, but are there, before we sort of get to that AI question, just want to touch briefly on, are there other technologies that have got your attention that we should also be paying attention to? Like, Adam, are there other things besides, AI that really, concern you that we should actually be watching?
Yeah, generally we talked about it earlier with that adoption of new technology. We're pushing edge computing hard, obviously, as an industry at the moment. That's great. We're now giving every user a gigabit worth of traffic in their hand, right? So how does that now change the data center? It redefines security in the data center and cloud computing generally, which I don't think's been well thought of. We're struggling. If we look at over the last couple of years, where security network speeds are outpacing security scanning 6-1. So there's a problem that's emerged where we're also, if you tag that into things like DNS over HTTPS or DOE or all these other things in the mix, we're bypassing traffic. We're removing our ability, or we're not getting visibility around traffic that we need to be getting visibility over from a security mindset or perspective. The other one is, of course, the OT environment attached to that edge or being part of that, in the mesh side of things. And then, of course, you've got the extended reality technologies and emerging biometric type technologies there. All these things for me, in the immediate right now, I mean, we can talk about quantum and all that, but that's further down the line. These things to me are right here, what's happening now, particularly, what's happening in the data centers. We've seen some technologies around zero trust. We talked about, Takahiro talked about it as well. We're really working with customers in that space there. But we don't want to make the same mistakes twice that we talked about earlier. So understanding the challenges of these different core areas and then saying, right, well, let's get back to the fundamentals. Let's deploy these and roll these things out correctly with the fundamentals. And of course, then we give ourselves half a chance. If we don't, if we let the operational side run free ahead of us, then they'll be chasing our tails again like we have done in the past. So I suppose that's in theme with the actual webinar itself, right? But if we can do that and stay focused, I think we give ourselves a crack at sort of reducing the risk.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And there's a lot of those technologies, right, that I think are adjacent to some of the IT technologies that we've been, dealing with that are, right on the cusp of sort of widespread adoption and deployment. And I think also the other thing from my perspective is a lot in the biospace, right? The sort of that connection between biological compute and what I think of as sort of silicon compute, right? Maybe carbon versus silicon compute, right? And how that's all going to come together, I think is quite interesting. Samir, other technologies that you're keeping an eye on out there?
So yeah, I mean, what Adam's sort of referring to is also related to kind of the IoT space as well. And what is from my perspective, when we talk about a lab, then we're looking very much at sort of something which is a bit lower level than that, which is, for example, new types of processors. It's the ARM processor is not new, but it does increase the different, or even you've talked about different file formats for different operating systems. Then we need to now learn a new architecture for the instruction set, and we may need to learn a new file format to parse. So that's just whereas the old file formats are still working and they're still containing malware as well. So for us, that is a challenge, right? Because when you need to reverse engineer something, you do need to actually know what's going on, and that means you have to keep learning quite difficult things after a while. So I think for us that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And looking at those kind of that deployment of those IoT devices, and I think people don't even think about them as computers, right? They don't think about them as devices that could be vulnerable. And so I think, we've actually done a really good job of convincing, I think, a very large percent of the population that, their laptop is, particularly vulnerable. And we've even done a halfway decent job of convincing them their phone has got a problem. But, we really haven't gotten into, your internet connected refrigerator. That's a problem. So I think that's kind of the next phase there. Takahiro, from your perspective, what are you seeing as technologies that you're keeping your eye on?
So it's still related to AI, but I'm focusing on agentic AI or AI agent. So AI agent will be able to break down the query or task on their own and planning and executing step. Even it can achieve verification by themselves. So AI agent will facilitate autonomy, but attacker will also be able to exploit the system as attack know-how is tooled or incorporated into attack infrastructure. So more complex attack will become possible for anyone. So specifically, it would be easy to combine multiple means of attack according to the target of attacks. So if I talk about non-AI related technology, it could be quantum computing. So it might be a time to start worry about harvesting now or decrypt later attack. So the point would be time to the working it really. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think in many ways, I'm actually one of those that believes that quantum computing, like a useful quantum computer, when it arrives, could actually in some ways be more disruptive than some of the AI technologies in terms of like its instantaneous disruption to the industry could actually be bigger than some of the AI disruptions to cybersecurity. Maybe not society as a whole, but in the cybersecurity space, I think that's true. So we're kind of coming to a close here on the webinar. And so I think what I want to do is kind of close this out with a question that's really about, kind of two things, drawing from your perspective in your situations in your different countries around the world. How do you see the cybersecurity market, the cybersecurity situation differing sort of in your region from, say, what I might be experiencing here in the US or, and sort of are there things happening domestically that are cybersecurity related, that would be of importance that people might want to know about? Takahiro, I'll go to you first because I know there's actually one coming in Japan. You've got some interesting legislation that's working its way through your parliament, through the Diet.
Yeah, thank you. So in Japan, I'm feeling that there might be a strong tendency to keep up with other organizations. For example, we often hear that, okay, so what solutions are deployed with other organization, especially in same industry? So I think the countermeasure know-how may be shared or a similar solution may be introduced according to guidelines. So I think this is in line with the progress of understanding of category of measures. So it means, for example, sometimes some detailed article or description could be released, so people can understand this solution, what's merit or demerit of this solution. So some understanding could be proceed with step by step. So I think that's one reason to how can I say we can align with other organization. So, yeah, I think thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Samir.
So there has been a focus on cybersecurity for quite a long time in India, and in fact, the first time you and I met, Michael, you had told me about meeting the cybersecurity head of the country at some point from India, right? So the focus has been on that. Last couple of years has been something called the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which has been ratified by Parliament. My concern, however, is that the legal space is there, but compliance is a bit difficult to actually get done. And the reason for that is that a lot of enterprises here in India are very cost sensitive, and unless they're actually forced to do something, they don't actually do it. So I think that is the pretty big difference between, let's say, India and sort of the US and Europe, where I suppose the concept of fines and so on are just beginning to percolate through to the point where people enterprises really do need to pay attention to that and act upon it, because the only industry which really does take cybersecurity extremely seriously in India is the finance industry, because it is governed by the Reserve Bank of India, and because it's related financial data, and the RBI, the Reserve Bank, is seen to be very strict. They do actually conform to the requirements. They're called guidelines by the RBI, but they're actually very stringent rules. So I would like to see a situation where that happens to in more industries within the country, so that they take the right steps to protect both the infrastructure as well as customer data and so on.
Great. All right, Adam.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, look, APAC and in the our region here, more broadly, I suppose one of the challenges for it is the diversity. The region itself is very diverse. We have micro economies in places like Indonesia and India, but also, like as Samir said, in Mumbai, it's one of the largest fintech, well, it is the largest fintech ecosystem in the world, right? So that even just in India, that diversity is so large. Australia obviously is a lot smaller, but the same challenges exist. So I think Australia missed a trick several years ago, and we started bringing in new cyber legislation that we didn't make privacy a fundamental pillar of our legislation, unlike Europe. And this then didn't really drive the change at the enterprise level, and of course that led to no real punitive measures or a reason for companies to adopt better practice. Exactly like Samir said, like it doesn't matter, I think, if someone's cost centric, or not in that sense. The companies will always look to, if they don't have to spend, why would they, right? So I think we need to look generally in the industry how we deal with that fragmented, situation from the diversity side in the region, and then of course try to work together. We've seen a lot of this happening in the ASEAN summits. We saw it happen at the G20 in Indonesia as well, where privacy was actually number 2 on the list at the G20, which I thought was remarkable to have privacy move into one of the top 5 discussion points. So yeah, getting through that regulatory environment, getting aligned, and then also getting collaboration in the region, like to help track down cyber criminals. We still know that a large portion of this happens up, in Southeast Asia. The last Asian summit was actually in Laos, and of course on the borders there. So really getting this collaboration, if we can get people aligned there, we can see some real, good outcomes coming from cyber investigations, which traditionally, as we all know, have been difficult. I think Europe has their act together there, and of course, Europe and America and Australia and India are all, and Japan, all together, in collaborating as some examples and many more. But throughout Southeast Asia, because of that diversity and fragmentation, that's often not as easy to get done. And the other thing is rapid growth, and that was a theme of everything today as well through the other discussions. When we see rapid growth, well, you see more risk, open up, right? So as countries are going on digital rapid transformations, quickly, of course, that leads to sometimes gaps being in systems that wouldn't normally be there. So, yeah, that's kind of the difference, I suppose. There's a massive amount of growth in the region, and that leads to challenges, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank you, thank all three of you for joining me in this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I think it is also, just emblematic of I'll just say it, one of the miracles of modern technology, that we're able to put together a webinar and have, this kind of interaction from, essentially Washington, D.C., Perth, Mumbai, and Tokyo. That's a pretty amazing accomplishment. And it's really quite remarkable, and something that I think, we have started to take for granted, and that those of us that work in cybersecurity are the ones trying to make sure that this kind of thing can continue to happen uninterrupted. And I think it's a great mission. But I just want to thank you all for joining me today, and I will look forward to talking with you and seeing you all at conferences and various parts of the world. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Michael. And
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, CTA. Good night, Michael.